Hello, today I'm going to be making a video about things you should know before you get a crested gecko. Now, crested geckos are very popular pets, they're very popular reptiles because they're very easy to care for overall. Their enclosures aren't ginormous compared to some reptiles, maybe like monitors or tegus, but they are very reasonable for any normal home. They're very reasonable sized enclosures. Anyway, so there are a couple of things you should know before you get one, and things you should take into consideration. Okay, first thing, crested geckos can live up to 15 years or longer. With that being said, you should really keep that in mind when you get one. Will you be able to care for this pet in the future? Will you have the funds to do so? And if no, consider adoption. There are tons of geckos on Craigslist or in shelters, and maybe you can get an adult, and that way you won't have one for as long. So keep that in mind when getting one if the lifespan effect. Number two, geckos. One reason so many people like them is because they don't need insects. They're not insectivores. They don't just rely on insects, for instance, like a leopard gecko. But that's a bit of a misconception. They do eat insects where they come from, and they really benefit from insects in their diet. Now, my guy does get feeders, and I also own a leopard gecko, so I do always have feeders on hand, so that's not too much of an issue for me. But for someone who only has a crested gecko, then they may not want to get feeders. But honestly, they're not that expensive. And considering that it's not going to be the main staple of their diet, you aren't going to need that many. Maybe like once a week is already good for them. And they do benefit from the protein. So that's one thing you gotta keep in mind. You kind of have to feed feeders insects. And you're going to want to do that. Number three. Another reason that crested geckos can be really popular, or are popular, because of heating requirements. Now, they thrive between 75 or 70 to around 80 being around the highest recommended. Now, that's usually speaking room temperature, but the thing you have to keep in mind is how warm is your room or the room you're keeping them in. And if your room gets really hot or really cold, you may have to invest in some sort of heating source. Now, this can put some people off, but the way I think of it, if you can't provide something as simple as light, you shouldn't get the pet in the first place. For me, I don't need one since my room is always at 75, around 75, so I don't really need one. But if your room gets too cold or too hot, you will need to invest in some sort of heating source. And the last thing I can think of as of right now is that you will need to interact with your gecko readily. If you do not, they will not be tamed. Just as people who have large reptile collections, they don't interact so much with the reptiles. So with that being said, if they want to hold them, usually they don't want to be held, or they're not used to being held. So if this is your only reptile or one of the few reptiles you own, you will need to interact with them daily. If you do not, they will not be tamed. My boy, I got him from Craigslist, and his previous owner had not held him in 4 years. Now that's a bit extreme, but he was extremely aggressive. The first day he bit on and he held on to my fingers for 5 minutes, and with that being said, he has calmed down a lot now. But for any other person, you will want to hold your gecko daily if you want to be able to interact with them and have them like crawl onto your hand and things like that. So those are 4 points that I can think of that you should keep in mind before you get a crested gecko. They are amazing pets overall, and they are not difficult to care for by any means. Their needs can be very easily met. And so let's show you my boy. Okay, so this is my crested gecko, Seiya. He is currently 5 years old. It's right here, sorry. He's 5 years old, and he is a male. He does not have his tail. That's actually something I forgot to think about, but I didn't think that was too important to include. But yes, he is tailless. I got him tailless. Not that that bothers me too much. I think it's cute. He's a little frog, but... And that is him. I love him so much. And this is a little guy. He's not fired up, so you can't really see. There he is. Oh. Don't worry, he just landed on my laptop. But yeah, there he is. Guy. So yeah, those are 4 points you should keep in mind, or at least 4, I want to say pretty big points that you should keep in mind before you get a crested gecko. They're amazing pets, and you should consider one. Okay, so this was when I was editing, but another point is that crested geckos are nocturnal, and this is really important, and I forgot to bring it up. This can really put people off or on. It can really be like a determining factor. But yes, crested geckos are nocturnal. My boy does not really have a routine, surprisingly, but generally speaking, it's around 7 p.m. for me anyway, and above. And I know a lot of people who have crested geckos and say that theirs doesn't wake up till like 11, if not later or earlier. And so, again, keep that in mind. They are nocturnal. One more thing. I'm so sorry I keep saying 4 points. It's probably more than that.